Hello, everybody. Welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we want to talk a little bit about workflows and how to actually use workflows through APIs. And to discuss this, we have with us Frank Kilcommins, Head of Enterprise Architecture at Gentic, and also co-author and editor, I think, of the OpenAPI initiatives Arazzo workflow specification. Is that a good intro for you, Frank?
That is perfect, Erik. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks for joining. We had two videos on this channel already. In one, which is, I think, over a year now, we talked about Arazzo generally when it was released. That was more of an intro of the specification itself. And then we had another one that I think, recorded when we discussed it in another location. I'll link those two videos. So in case you need more information about Arazzo, check out those videos. So what I want to do today is discuss one idea that I had, which I think might be interesting. And that idea would be to say, if we have workflows that orchestrate APIs, wouldn't it be cool if those workflows had APIs? Is that a weird idea, or what do you think about that, Frank?
Well, we love APIs on this channel, so I don't think it's a weird idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like ultimately, when you think about a workflow, whatever wants to consume or get value from that workflow wants to be able to discover it and ultimately execute it or invoke it. So, offering an API entry point to that, I think makes a lot of sense.
Just looking at, I think, the number of videos that I have where people talk about API first and API this and API that, right? So I think also a little bit in the spirit of drinking your own champagne, as I think one now has to say, it might be interesting to think about what we could get out of kind of API enabling Arazzo workflow. So why would we even want to do this? Do you have any motivation that you could think of, Frank?
I think the immediate benefits that kind of spring out of the grass or the weeds, whatever you want to call it, would be just kind of the rich tooling ecosystem that's around there in general for APIs. So, like ultimately, even if you invoke an API, there will be a certain amount of business logic that's happening underneath that, simple entry point or surface area that you might be exposing. So I don't think it's beyond the realm of practicality to think about just a workflow as being, when you think about it in Arazzo terms, as being like a declarative codification of what's happening within that workflow to achieve a particular use case that you're interested in. And then making that exposable as an API is just opening it up to this whole rich ecosystem of tooling that's already supporting API standards like OpenAPI itself. Like really, when you think about API gateways as an example, or API catalogs, like being able to express your workflows as use case oriented capabilities, allow them to be registered and discoverable in gateways, allow you to apply policies on top of them, be it with regards to access policies, usage quota or rate limiting policies, monetization policies. It opens up a lot of power and, let's say, intriguing kind of concepts that you can start applying into that kind of workflow level rather than the discrete APIs or micro products, as I heard you calling them not too long ago as well.
I don't think that term has a long future ahead of it, but I liked it. But I do like this general idea of exposing workflows as something that is easily findable, reusable, discoverable, and has all these wonderful things. So let's very briefly, and we don't really have to talk about possible solutions yet. We will do that later on, I would assume. But what are the things that we would need to do? I think we could probably summarize that pretty quickly into just very few things that we need to tackle in some shape or form. OpenAPI asks us to design APIs in a certain way. So what did that mean for Arazzo? What's kind of missing, so to speak, in the Arazzo specification itself that we would need to add to then be able to expose that workflow as an OpenAPI described API?
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to expose it in kind of OpenAPI or HTTP based kind of terminology, you would need, that kind of endpoint or that server that you could actually invoke, and then what appropriate method would you actually then utilize to be able to kick off the process. So I think it'd be very sensible to think about exposing a post endpoint where you would send the shape of the inputs that are required by the Arazzo workflow to get going. And then at the very end of the Arazzo execution, it returns outputs. And utilizing OpenAPI, then you have, I guess you would have to maybe do a little bit of kind of gray matter thinking to really decide what types of errors would be appropriate to expose from the workflow, because if they are internal and opaque, kind of from a workflow perspective, so not necessarily something a client can react to, then probably you would just need to map those to the appropriate kind of response codes that would be applicable for that. But I think that in a very kind of simplistic view, that's kind of all you would need to do. Obviously, thinking about security would be something that would be kind of useful as well. And then maybe thinking about wherever that would be registered, if it would be in a gateway, what type of other policies would be applicable, and maybe even overlaying those onto the OpenAPI at point in time.
You were mentioning security, and I thought about this a little bit myself, and it seemed to me that there are some similarities, maybe not like into the details, but just on the architectural level between the current MCP discussion, where there's a lot of debate around, is MCP enterprise ready, or what would it take to do security enterprise style, so to speak, with MCP. Do you see that there are some similarities? Not necessarily, that this would take the exact same approach, but just structurally speaking, that we could maybe learn something from the current MCP discussions.
Yeah, I think, let's say, exploring and understanding kind of the current challenges that are being faced in the MCP world might also be applicable here. I think in general, just thinking about, let's say, fairly coarse-grained APIs that are already existing out there and how they are exposed to consumers would be a very applicable from a workflow perspective as well. Arazzo itself, as a workflow specification, doesn't have a strong opinion on security. It kind of delegates that to the underlying more discrete APIs that, when all coming together, offer the value that's on offer from a workflow perspective. But if you are the provider who is responsible or owning those underlying APIs, I think it's very natural, if you then have an Arazzo workflow that utilizes them, that you can then think about, okay, if we wanted to put in like an on behalf of or delegated authorization model on top of the workflow, so that we can actually then provide the right scopes to whatever is processing the workflow, so that it can obtain and get the tokens required to actually invoke the full chain. And then they would be verifiable at each underlying API that's being consumed by the machinery that's processing the workflow.
So I see you already have quite a number of ideas what could be done. So let's assume that's an idea that's worth discussing at least, and see what different people think about it. So what would be the next step that would be in line with how things typically work at the OpenAPI initiative, to just figure out if people find this interesting and what they would be interested in?
Yeah, so I think just engage with the community. So get into Slack, get into GitHub. Start poking around, asking questions. In general, OpenAPI doesn't necessarily build the tooling as a project, as an initiative. So also ask your vendors. Say, hey, you want this capability, you want to be able to support workflows, you want to be able to get them mapped as APIs and registered as APIs, and then that will help us accelerate the specifications too.
Okay, I think that's a good point. Ask your vendor. Yeah, we'll do that. So we do see an increasing ecosystem of Arazzo implementations being available, and that actually could be a very cool feature, so to speak, that could become a part of those implementations. Great. So I think that's what we'll do. Thanks a lot for your time, Frank. That was really all I wanted to just discuss today, just discussing this idea a little bit and see, does it make any sense? What would it take? And let's see where this is going. So thanks again, Frank.
Thanks, Erik. Always a pleasure.
And thanks, everybody, for joining. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing. And until next time, keep getting APIs to work. Bye-bye.